Hi everybody, in this tutorial we're going to look at Illustrator. We'll talk about what it's used for, we'll take a look at the interface, go over some of the panels, and we'll take a look at some of the different palettes and go over some of the different tools in the program. Alright, let's get started. Adobe Illustrator is a vector-based program. Vector graphics are made up of lines and curves called paths. You can move and modify vector graphics without losing any detail. You can scale them way up in size and you'll keep the same crisp edges, as opposed to a raster-based program like Photoshop, which uses pixels to make up its images. Pixels are the individual little dots that create the image, and when you enlarge it, you aren't adding any new pixels, so you're just losing that detail. You're just blowing up the pixels. So that's a big benefit of Illustrator, being able to resize your art infinitely. To illustrate that, here's an example of a vector graphic and a raster image. This vector sun here is made up of the paths I mentioned earlier and can be scaled up all we want, and we won't lose any of that detail. It maintains that crisp edge no matter how big you make it, as opposed to this one that's made up of the pixels. When we scale it up, we're only scaling up those pixels. We're not adding any detail to it. So we lose all of that quality that we keep with the vector graphic. Some of the different things that designers use Illustrator for would be creating graphics for things like posters or postcards. You can use it for making website layouts. You could create graphics for infographics, and then you would take these graphics and animate them in a program like After Effects later. You can use it for creating layouts for your apps. But one of the major things that people use it for is for creating logos. And like I mentioned earlier, it's great for scaling up the logo infinitely without losing any of that detail or bringing it down really small. So you can print on things really tiny, or you can blow it up really big for printing on billboards. Now that we've talked a little bit about what Illustrator is used for, let's take a look at some of the different palettes, panels, and tools in Illustrator. We're going to dive into this deeper in the different videos. We're just going to take a quick look and give you an idea of the layout of Illustrator. So this top menu, you have File, which is where you create a new project. You can open an existing one. You can save your project, or you can print from here. In Edit, here's where you do your copying, your cutting, your pasting. Also, your preferences are in here. I think if you're working on a Mac, you're going to have an Illustrator menu up here, and this is where you can select your preferences. Under Object, this is where it gives you all of your options for different objects you create in Illustrator. So here's where you would manipulate them. You can scale them, flip them, rotate them, things of that nature. Type is where you have your font and your font options. Select is where you can select the different objects in your project and also arrange them differently. The Effect menu is where you have your different filters, such as blurs or drop shadows. The View menu has things like rulers and grids and bounding boxes and just things for helping you out while you work. The Window menu is where we find our different palettes. So some of the more important ones are things like the Color palette, and this is where you can select different colors to work with. Or the Layers palette, for instance, and this is a really important one. We're going to be using this a lot. This lets you build different objects and put them into different layers here, and you can create new layers and arrange these layers all in here, and it's really good for organization, and we're going to be dealing with this one a lot. This is something you're marked on quite a bit, on how well your layers are organized, if they're named, and just if everything's clean in there. Under the Help menu, we have this Illustrator Help, and this will take you to the Adobe website where you can ask questions. They also have their own tutorials up there if you want to check those out. So let's take a look at the Tool menu now. I'm not going to go into great detail on each tool because there will be dedicated videos to the different tools we'll be using for the project. But let's just take a quick look and I'll explain how it works. So this is your Tool menu here. If you click on this arrow, you can stack them differently, so you can stack them side by side, or have them all stacked on top of each other. If you grab this little icon, if you grab that, you can pull them off and move them. And to redock them, just grab it again, move it over to the side until you see that blue, and just redock it there. If you hover on the different tools, it'll give you the name and also the hotkey. So that letter V is what you press to bring up that tool. And they each have their own separate one. You'll notice some of the tools have a little arrow beside them, and that means that there are multiple tools nested underneath that tool. So if you click and hold on it, you can see the other tools that are under there. So say we come to this rectangle tool, this is the Shapes menu one, and if you click and hold on it, you'll see all of your different shapes here. Also, if you go up to the Window menu and select the Properties panel, It's going to bring up the properties for each tool, and each tool has their own set of properties, and you can input different things in here. All right, that's going to wrap up this lesson on our brief overview of Illustrator.